Okay. All right. Welcome everyone to Learn to Crochet. My name is Jenny Bowden. I am joined today by our friend Marie Segares of the Underground Crafter, and we are going to learn how to crochet today. So the class is an hour long. We've got a lot to go over. So I'm going to keep the introduction short real quick, but I wanted to just quickly share with you guys this wonderful introductory offer from our friends and sponsor today, the digital magazine, I Like Crochet. It's a digital magazine published by Prime Publishing, and it publishes 6 times a year. Normally it's $47.64 for a 1-year subscription, but today for you guys, we've prepared an introductory offer for you. For just $11.88, you get a year subscription to the magazine, plus you get access to all the back issues as well. So it's a really great opportunity to get access to all these exclusive patterns. Everything is tech edited. There's no advertisements. So it's a really great deal. The URL here at the bottom, I'll post it in the chat as well. ilikecrochet.com /crochet101 is how you can take advantage of this deal. It's for new subscribers only. So if you are already a subscriber, thank you. If you have any questions about I Like Crochet, again, please feel free to use the Q&A feature in the bottom. Again, that's all I have. My name is Jenny. If you have any questions, use the Q&A. I'm going to throw it back over to Marie. So
wonderful. Before I get started, I'm just going to see if anybody wants to share in the chat, and maybe Jenny can keep me updated as we switch over. Well, we don't have to switch over yet, but before we switch over to the other camera, if anyone here has crocheted before or not. And so I have a little survey that I'm just going to drop into the chat. And if you can let me know, it's like a multiple choice, whether you've crocheted before or not, and a little bit later in the class, we'll get a chance to take a peek at how many people are already crocheters and who are new to crochet and all that fun stuff. So we'll kind of work on that in a little bit. So again, my name is Marie Segares, and I am a crochet and knitting blogger and designer and teacher. I second the I Like Crochet magazine. It's one of my favorites, and you can find a bunch of my designs in there as well. And so today we're going to talk about a bunch of different things you need to know before you get started crocheting. And for those of you that may have already crocheted a little, hopefully we'll give a little bit extra information that you didn't have before. What I'm going to start with is talking about yarn. And so Jenny, if you can switch over to the other camera, that would be great. It should be the other.
Do you want your hands or your face?
Yeah, the hands, okay. Sorry, that wasn't clear. Okay, so first
hands, I think are upside down.
Ah, okay. So let's redo that. Yes, we had some technical issues a little bit earlier today, which always are fun, but I know people will be understanding of that. So
welcome to the world of Zoom. Actually, it's horizontal.
What just happened? Did it go on horizontal?
I think it went away completely.
Well, I'm going to start talking while I redo this camera so that you can know. First thing we want to talk about is yarn weights. And so yarns come in different weights, and the weights are basically the thickness of the yarn. And so the thickness has a couple of different things that you may want to know about. First of all, the thickness will tell us how big our project will probably end up. So if we have a very, very thick yarn, most likely our project is going to be in a situation where it's going to be pretty large. When we have a thinner yarn, it's probably going to be a little bit smaller. So that's one thing. And another thing about yarn is, actually, before we talk about weights, we can talk about fibers. So how many people here have used acrylic yarn before? People can put a comment in the chat. Acrylic is, it's a man-made material. It's a really affordable type of yarn, so a lot of people have used it. And it's also a kind of yarn that is, it has really good memory, so it doesn't stretch a lot. So what you'll see, and I see a lot of people have used it, some people love it, I see, it doesn't stretch a lot, and that's one of the things that people like about it. So if you crochet something and it turns out to be a certain size, most likely it's going to be that same size in the future. So it's not going to stretch out. Whereas with some other yarns, you'll get that type of stretch. So that's acrylic yarn. Another benefit of acrylic yarn is it's machine washable and dryable. So it's very easy to care for. So you find a lot of people will use it for baby projects. And the reason again for that is, you know, anyone here who's had a baby, you don't want to have a lot of fancy washing instructions. I know if you know, you want to be able to just throw it in the wash with everything else. And so that's a benefit of acrylic. And so another thing besides that is that it's available because it's man-made yarn. It accepts a lot of different types of dyes. So it's available in a huge range of colors. And so you can pretty much find every color that you may want to work with acrylic. So those are the pluses of acrylic. The downside, on a day like today, where at least for me in New York City, it's a bit warm. And so acrylic is not very breathable. And so it's a kind of yarn where basically anything that you make is not going to be very breathable. That might be good in the winter. You might want to keep the heat in, but in the summer for warm weather projects, it's a little bit less flexible. So that's a challenge. And then let's talk a little bit about another type of yarn. And I have some acrylic yarn here, and you can see it's in, you know, a very vibrant color. So another type of yarn that's really common is wool yarn. And maybe people can let us know if they've used wool yarn before in the chat. So wool comes from sheep. So it's shorn from sheep. If it's done in a humane way, it doesn't harm the sheep at all. It's sort of like getting a haircut for them. So it doesn't have to be something that hurts the sheep necessarily to get their hair shorn. And then it is woven into a bunch of different types of colors and weights. Now, wool, one of the advantages, some people like it because it's a natural fiber, and other people enjoy using it because it has, it's very breathable. So unlike the, unlike the acrylic, where it can kind of retain heat and things like that, the wool is both breathable and it keeps temperature in. So in a hot day, you can actually get some airy breeze in a wool yarn, but in a cold weather, it keeps the heat in. So it's really good for a lot of different seasons. And I see a couple of people have used wool for weaving and knitting, making hats for veterans. So a lot of great projects. Wool is the type of fiber that doesn't really stretch. So a benefit there is that you could actually use wool for a lot of different types of projects. Again, you don't have to worry about it stretching out. But with wool, a downside is it's not always machine washable. Nowadays, they have something called washable wool. So it's been treated before. And because of that treatment, it's able to be used for a lot of different projects that require machine washing. Another interesting thing with wool, it doesn't accept every type of dye. So while it is available in a lot of different colors, it's probably a few less colors than you would see with acrylic. And then wool is also a yarn that a lot of moths like. So if you happen to have moths, wool can be not your best friend sometimes, but it is a great yarn for a lot of different projects. There are some people that are allergic to wool, and so that's always a thing you should be mindful of if you're making something as a gift with wool yarn. And some people with wool allergies are allergic to all yarns with wool, and some just 100% wool yarns. Because it's a natural fiber, and it comes from an animal's fleece. Think about it like hair, how some people have curly hair, some people have straight hair. The different sheep have hair that's, you know, or fleeces, I should say, that are a little different. So some of the wool could be a little scratchier, and some of the wool might be a little bit easier to work with. So Jenny, I don't know if you saw, I dropped you a note. If you could just send me that number again, so I can get back on with the other camera, that would be
I
great.
did not see that note. I apologize.
Yes, that's okay.
How are
So
you?
so that's wool yarn. And so I use wool a lot for beginners. It can be more expensive. So for folks that are just starting out, sometimes they don't necessarily want to use wool because they feel like, you know, I'm just starting crochet. I don't know if I want to invest into this as much, right, as if I already have been doing this for a long time. So I think that that could be something about wool that everyone, you know, people will feel differently about. So now another, I saw a few people saying that they've used cotton before already. So if anyone else has used cotton and hasn't mentioned it yet, you can definitely do that in the chat. And so with cotton, some of the advantages of cotton, I mean, most of us use cotton all the time in our clothing, right? So we know kind of what cotton's like, right? Cotton tends to be something that is very much a breathable yarn. It's something that we can wash in the machine, although it may shrink in the dryer. And then, so it has those advantages that we just know from cotton in general. And so that's a plus. And then, oops, sorry, I lost my screen there for a second. So that's a plus of kind of working with cotton. Cotton, it stretches and it also shrinks. I know that seems weird, but it does a little bit of both. And for that reason, it's not always great for certain projects, because if you're trying to keep the shape a very specific size, it will be challenging. Okay, so Jenny, I think we're back on with the other camera if you want to spotlight that for a moment, and we can talk about yarn weights. So when we think about yarn weights, that is the thickness. Okay, and so these are 3 yarns of 3 different weights, and I'm just going to sort of show you. This one is a double knitting, which in the United States is usually called a light or a 3 weight. This one is a worsted or medium weight, which is usually called the number 4 in the United States. And this is a bulky weight, which is number 5 in the US, and also sometimes called a chunky in other countries. So when you look at them together, you can see that each one is a little bit, you know, this is the lightest one, then it gets a little heavier and a little heavier. So why does the weight matter? It's not just an issue of the size, because if we really, really wanted, we could use this thin yarn and make a huge project out of it, right? It would just require more stitches. But it's also the look of how we want the stitches to be. Do we want the stitches to be a little bit larger, or do we want them to be a little bit smaller? Usually when we make a project, for the most part, we're going to try to use a yarn that's all the same weight. And the reason for that is it's just, we can be more consistent with our hook size as we're working, and we don't have to worry as much about issues with different sizes. So how do we know the yarn weight? And for those of you that have already crocheted, you may know this already, but for those of you that are newer, it's usually on the package in some shape or form. So in the US, we have a yarn weighting system, which goes by numbers. And as the numbers get bigger, the yarn gets thicker. So we start with a 0, which is like almost like sewing thread. It's so thin. And then we go up until 7, which is like a super thick yarn that, you know, you might get only 1 stitch in an inch, right? It's that thick. So that's the first thing we can tell from the yarn label is the weight. Now, this is a yarn from another country. This is from the UK, and it doesn't have that number system. So how do we tell? Well, usually in other countries, they will tell you the weight of the yarn on the actual front of the yarn or list it. So here, as I said, it's DK, which stands for double knitting, and that is the same as a US size 3 yarn. So first thing, like we said, is the weight. So now we know the thickness of it. Then we know the actual weight is also on there, which is how much does this particular ball of yarn weigh. Another trick, if you don't have the yarn weight, to figuring out how much the yarn itself weighs is looking at the amount of yards or meters per the weight of the yarn. So that's another option, because as the yarn is thicker, there's going to be fewer yards or meters in every ounce or gram. So that's another piece. Now, a lot of yarn labels also include these tiny little hooks and needles, and that gives you a suggestion on what hook they recommend for this thickness of yarn. And that's a great tip for beginners because it can be really tough to figure out, when you're first crocheting, gosh, like what hook do I use with this yarn? I don't know. Is it too thick? Is it too thin? Right? So those are all tips that you can get from the yarn label. They also tell you what it's made of. So this is acrylic, and then it tells you if it's machine washable or dryable. Sometimes they tell you in words, and sometimes they use those international symbols for laundry care. So all of that is helpful because when you think about the yarn you want for a project, you want it to match the use of a project. So for example, if you're going to make something that you plan to wash a lot, it has to be machine washable, right? If you plan to make something really delicate and special and you want to hand wash it, it's okay if it doesn't let you do hand washing. So that's a great sort of beginner start. So a couple of other things about yarn besides the weight and the thickness. We talked before about cotton yarn. So cotton yarn is sometimes a little bit working with it can be a little bit different than other types of yarn because, as I said, it has the tendency to stretch while you're crocheting with it, but then shrink when you wash it. So that's something to keep in mind. A lot of cotton yarn comes in a blend. So this, I think, is cotton and acrylic, and that's to sort of balance out the stretchiness of the cotton yarn. So that a lot of people that are making garments with cotton yarn, you'll want to use a blend so that it evens out that sort of stretchy, shrinky thing that happens with cotton yarn. Now, so far, we've only been looking at solid color yarns. There are also multicolor yarns, and there's a lot of different styles of multicolor yarns now. It's way fancier than it was when I was a kid. So I'm going to share a couple of different types of multicolor yarn with you. So this one here is a speckled yarn. So this will mostly look solid when you crochet it, but there'll be sort of little pops of color where you can see the color here. And this is a similar yarn. It's a flecked yarn. And the colors on the flecked yarn actually have a different texture. And so that's something that's a little bit different about the flecked yarn. Now, this is what's called a self-striping yarn or a long color repeat yarn. And the way you can tell these is that when they're before you take the yarn out of, in this case, it's in a cake, you'll see that a lot of the colors cluster together and there's a big chunk of one color before you get to the next color. That creates a project that is looks like more like a striped project. So this is something I made with a different color in that same yarn. And you can see that, one section is all one color. The next section is all one color. The next section is all one color, almost as if I had used 3 separate yarns and 3 different colors. So people like these self-striping yarns because you can get the look of stripes without having to cut your yarn as many times or without having to buy as many different types of yarn. So I see a question in the chat about what is crochet thread. So crochet thread is a very thin type of yarn. It's usually a 0 or a 1 on that number system that I was talking about. And it is 100% cotton. Usually crochet thread is also treated. It's called mercerization. And so the cotton, unlike this cotton, which has kind of a flat look, it will have a sort of shiny look to it. And that's what crochet thread is. A lot of people use it for lacy pieces like doilies and other types of decorative projects. You can also use it for clothing and stuff as well. So all the yarns we've looked at so far are smooth. There's also what we call novelty yarns. This is one that is a fur yarn. For beginners in general, I recommend steering away from these really, really textured yarns, only because it can be very hard to see your stitches and it can be pretty confusing as to what's happening. So for a very, very new beginner, I recommend sticking with these more what we call just a smooth yarn that doesn't have a lot of texture to it. Also, another tip for beginners when you pick out your yarn is to use a color that's lighter so that you can see a little bit better what you're doing. A question about organic yarn, they have organic cotton yarn as a choice for cotton yarn if that's something that you're interested in. So let's talk a little bit about hooks. And so I'm going to switch over to some hooks, and I will first start with kind of the standard crochet hooks. So I know that some of you have already hopefully crocheted before, and some of you, this is your first time, and you probably looked at the crochet hooks and said, gosh, there's so many choices. What do I pick? So some of the first things to think about is what is the actual part of the hook that you are going to crochet with made out of. And this is a metal hook. They also have wooden hooks, and I will show you some of those as well. And why do we care about what material the hook is made with? It's not quite as important as the yarn, because we could use a hook of a different material and our project will still come out the same, but this is more about comfort and preference. So this is a wooden crochet hook, and the benefits of wooden crochet hooks are that basically what you'll see is that again, I mentioned earlier that it's pretty toasty warm here in New York today. So on a day like today where I might be a little bit hot, having a metal hook, it tends to get very sweaty because it's thermally conductive. And having a wooden hook, it doesn't do that as much because it's not really conducting my heat in the same way. So it's a little bit more comfortable to use. Some people that have arthritis or other hand issues find that it's really tough to use the metal hooks, that they can be a little bit more stressing on the hand. So with a typical standard crochet hook, there's a couple different things you're looking at. First, there's this hook part on the top here, and that's where your yarn is going to catch. Then this is what's called the throat, this next piece, and you'll also be using this as you crochet. Most of the hooks have a flattened section next. Some of the comfort hooks, actually that section is larger, but that section is called the thumb rest. And that's where you want your thumb to rest. And that's because for every hook, it's in a slightly different position. But if you put your thumb on the thumb rest, it will give you the most control over the hook for the way that that particular hook is balanced. And it will also put less strain on your hand. And so those are a couple of things to think about. Now, with crochet hooks, some of them are what's called tapered. So if we look at this hook, and I don't want it to refocus too much, but you can see there's a little angle here on the throat, and that it's not the same width all the way throughout. And then there's some hooks where it's the exact same width all the way through. Those are called inline hooks. That's a matter of preference. Some people like to have a crochet hook that is exactly the same all the way through. They find that it's easier to crochet, and some people like the tapering. Same thing, they find it's easier to crochet. So it's something that you're going to have to kind of try out for yourself and decide what works best for you. So that's for standard crochet. And then I mentioned that there's some hooks that people use that are ergonomic hooks. And what I mean by ergonomic is that they're designed so that your hand doesn't get strained if you crochet a lot. And so also these are helpful for people that have any type of crochet or any type of hand injury or like arthritis or anything. So a lot of these ergonomic hooks, actually the thumb rest is much wider than the rest of the hook, and that's to prevent you from having an overly tight grip, which might strain your hand. So that's one type of ergonomic hook. Another type has more of a sort of smooth shape throughout. And then the other type has like a rubber grip. So it's similar. These two would both also be considered ergonomic hooks. The tip of the hook and the throat are the same as a standard crochet hook, but then there's like a rubberized grip that makes it a little bit more comfortable to hold. So that's something to consider if you crochet a lot, or if you have any type of hand issue that might make you be more concerned about your comfort. And then we have Tunisian crochet hooks, and you'll notice that these are a little bit longer and that they have a stopper on the end, which is this little thing here. And that's because with Tunisian crochet, you actually keep your crochet on the hook, a little bit like knitting. So here's a little piece of Tunisian crochet. And as you're crocheting, you keep the yarn on the hook. And so the hook itself needs to be longer. Otherwise, your loops are going to fly right off. So you can have some like this that are solid. And just like with other crochet hooks, they're available in metal, they're available in wood, or you can have what's called an interchangeable hook. And so I'm going to show you how to do an interchangeable hook in case you have one of those. So interchangeable hooks come in sets usually. And the benefit of the set is that you have a lot of different hooks at once. And yes, the recording will be available. And so with the different types of hooks, you kind of make exactly the hook that you need for the project. So for example, let's say I wanted to use this hook, but I had a really, really big project that I'm making, a Tunisian crochet blanket. Then it comes with different cords, and I can choose a length that I prefer. Let's say for the big blanket, I want this really long cord. And then I would attach it to the hook. And usually they have a screw-in mechanism. Some of them have a snap-in mechanism. And then I would put on my stopper at the end. Okay. And that is basically a way that you can create your own crochet hook. These sets can be used for standard crochet as well. They don't have to be used for Tunisian crochet. So you can also use a much shorter cord, and you can do a more standardized type of crochet with this. So those are different types of hooks, and hooks go up into really big sizes too, because remember, our yarn comes in different sizes. So does our hooks. So you can have a hook even bigger than this actually for a very, very thick yarn, or some people like to take strands of many yarns, like 5 strands of a yarn, and crochet together like for a rug or something. And so you could use this very, very large hook to do that. So that's another option. And then 2 more tools I want to just show you quickly before we go on to our break. The first one is a knitting needle. And this we use for something called broomstick lace crochet, where we would, sort of similar to Tunisian crochet, where we would have our loops instead of on a hook, we would put them on a very big knitting needle, and that makes them stretch out a lot. And then we would use a standard crochet hook to crochet them off. So that's another type of crochet that we can do. And then another type of crochet that requires a specialized tool is called hairpin lace. And it has a tool like this. I'm just going to show you quickly how to put this together because some of us, maybe we got our grandmother's crochet kit and there's mysterious items in it that we're not sure what they are. So with the hairpin lace tool, you usually will start with, 2 on the outer side and then 1 in the center. And you can adjust these differently depending on how wide you want the project to be. You can also just use the 2. And on here, you can see that there's numbers. So it will, like, let's say if you want them both at 6 or both at 4, right? And these different widths will create projects of different widths. And then there's a whole technique involved, but you basically crochet onto these tools. And then this is just to keep it from unraveling. You just put this on while you have your crochet on here. So maybe some of you have seen these various tools in your toolbox. I don't know. If not, all we need for the rest of the class is just any type of crochet hook that seems to be a good size with the yarn that you have. So we're going to take a short break. Jenny, I know you have some instructions you want to share for the break. So let me get back to my screen there so I can share that information with people.
All right, thank you, Marie. Okay, so we have some exciting classes coming up with Marie. Today is our beginner Learn to Crochet class, but we also have some advanced crochet classes coming up in just a few weeks. So on June 10th, we are doing a Tunisian crochet class. On June 17th, we have a beautiful Crochet Borders class. And on the 24th of June, we will be learning about the Pineapple Stitch. So each one of these classes individually is $19.99, or you can buy the bundle of all 3 classes for $29.99, which is a 50% off savings. So it's a really good deal. If you can't make these dates or times, we do record all of the classes just like today. So you'll be getting a recording after the class from each event. So if you want to take what you're learning today and expand on that a little bit, these are 3 great classes that we have coming up with Marie. Same day and time. They're all on Thursdays, 11 a.m. Central Time. The link here at the bottom is how you can sign up for the classes on Eventbrite. So favecrafts.eventbrite.com. I can post that link in the chat as well. And then Marie, if you want to go to the next slide real quick. I just wanted to share once again the offer from our friends at I Like Crochet. So we have prepared this introductory offer for you guys today, 75% off the retail price. So instead of $47.64, you can get the 1-year subscription to I Like Crochet for just $11.88. And the link here is at the bottom as well. I will post it in the chat too. So ilikecrochet.com/crochet101. So all right, we are at the halfway mark. So that was our quick little intermission. And now I believe we will get started crocheting. So you guys are doing great. I know this is a new skill for some of you, so please be patient with yourselves as we are going. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A as we go along or the chat as well. So, all right, back to you, Marie.
Great. So let me just stop sharing here and stop share. Okay. All right. So yarn comes in a couple of different ways, but most yarn that we see comes in what's called a skein, which is where it's sort of wrapped around something, some invisible thing that they had in the mill, which is now gone. And usually we can pull the yarn out from the center. It's not always that easy depending on the company. And the reason we might want to pull it out by the center rather than by just unraveling it like this. First of all, we can keep the label on, which is helpful because once you start crocheting, you may start a project and put it down. And if you don't have the label, it's sometimes hard to remember what type of yarn it was, and if it's machine washable and all that good stuff. So keeping the label on is helpful. Also, another benefit of keeping the label on is the yarn is less likely to get tangled with other yarns if you keep it in a bag or somewhere. So I pulled out this piece from the inside, and you can see that it's actually not coming from the inside, it's coming from the outside. And that is usually a clue. So the side where the yarn comes out, but it's connected to the outside of the skein, it's usually the opposite end that you would use. And so we're going to try this other end. And just so you know, everyone sometimes fights with yarn. So it's not just you if you're having this problem. We're going to try to find a piece that's sort of willing to work with us. Let's see. Sometimes we don't get that piece so easily. And then we have something that is affectionately called yarn barf, where we get a big piece of yarn that flies out. And now this yarn is not cooperating, so I'm going to put it to the side and have another yarn so we can move forward a little bit more quickly. All right, so this yarn is willing to work with me today, so we're going to start with this one. So what I want you to do is to start with a bit of yarn that is probably, you don't need as much as I've just pulled out, but if you pull out a big old chunk of yarn barf, that's okay. we're going to first start by creating a slip knot. And so what you're going to have is you're going to have the end of the yarn, right? And then you're going to have the yarn that's coming from the ball. All right. So what I want you to do is to create a loop where the end of the yarn is on the top. Okay. And then we're going to create a loop in our hand from the other yarn, and we're going to pull it through that first loop. As we pull it, I'm going to just hold the short end of yarn, and it's going to make a knot. Right now, the knot is huge, but because it's a slip knot, we can adjust the size by pulling these two strands apart. I'm going to do that again so everyone can see what I did one more time. So again, we're going to start with the short strand of yarn. We're going to make a loop with that short strand on top. Then we're going to go to the yarn that's coming from the ball. We're going to make another loop. We're going to put that inside of this first loop. And then we're going to pull, we're going to hold the loop and we're going to pull the short yarn. And that will create this flexible knot called a slip knot. Most crochet projects start with a slip knot because you can adjust the size. So if we had a really big hook, we could put it on there. If we had a little hook, we could put it on there. So now you're going to place this hook onto your, this loop onto your crochet hook, and we're going to continue to adjust the size. We don't want it to be choking the crochet hook to death, but we also don't want there to be a huge gap. Okay, so just leave a little bit of slack, kind of like this. So you'll notice that I have a pretty long strand of yarn coming off. It doesn't have to be that long. I was really just demonstrating the slip knot, but it's good to leave about 5 inches of yarn. The reason for that, well, there's a couple of reasons, but one of the main reasons for that is it allows you to adjust your chain if you need to, but also it allows you to weave in your ends later, which is an important way of finishing your project so that it doesn't, sort of fall apart. So for those of you who haven't crocheted before, we're going to put the crochet hook in your dominant hand. So if you're a right-hander, it'll be in your right hand. If you're a left-hander, it'll be in your left hand. That thumb rest is where your thumb should be. And there's 2 main ways of holding the crochet hook. Some people hold it more like a knife, which is what I usually do. So your thumb would be on the thumb rest and the rest of your hand will be around the back. And some people hold it more like a pen. And so they would have the hook pointed upwards. Okay. So that's the job of your dominant hand. Your non-dominant hand also has a job. It doesn't get to take a nap. It's in charge of the yarn. So that's its job. So I'm just also going to show quickly for left-handers. So for the left-hander, you would do the same kind of thing. You would have your thumb on the thumb rest, and you would choose either the knife grip or the pencil grip, and then your right hand would hold the yarn. Okay, so any questions so far on the slip knot, please let us know in the chat or the Q&A. Okay, so now we're going to make our first what's called a chain, and a chain is a foundational stitch of crochet. So we're going to take our yarn coming from the ball. Now this is important because if your strand here is kind of long and you have all your yarn jumbled up, it's easy to grab the wrong strand of yarn. So let's make sure that our strand that's not connected to anything is all the way off to one side so we don't accidentally confuse ourselves. And then let's take the other strand of yarn. And we're going to do what's called a yarn over. So we're going to work counterclockwise from back towards the front. And then we're going to use our hook to pull this loop that we just made with the yarn over through this loop that we have already on the hook. Okay. And so I'm going to do that with my hook. And I'm going to do that by pulling the hook towards my dominant hand, rotating it, and pulling it through the loop. But if you're a real beginner crocheter, you may not be able to see or to do that as easily. And so it's okay if at the beginning you use your hands more than the hook. It takes a little time to build the muscle memory. So you're going to wrap that yarn over, and then you're going to pull the hook through like that to make a chain. Okay. And so we're going to keep doing that for a while. We're going to wrap our yarn over from back to the front. And you'll notice that I'm using my left hand to hold this yarn so that I don't just leave it here and then hope that somehow by magic, I'm going to be able to make these stitches. I'm using my left hand to keep the yarn from going every which way. Okay, so that's important. And people develop different ways of holding the yarn. Some people have very intricate systems where they interlace it through their fingers. I encourage you at the beginning to just focus on getting the motions down and not focus so much on your exact form, because as you get more comfortable with the motions, that'll come to you a little bit easier. So again, we're going to wrap the yarn from the back to the front. And then we're going to pull the hook slowly towards our dominant hand and pull the loop through. Okay, so we're going to keep doing that, these chains over and over. And first, I want you to focus on just getting those motions down, wrap the yarn over, pull the hook through the loop on the hook, wrap the yarn over, use the hook to pull that loop through the loop that's already on the hook. If you've crocheted before, I want you to focus on getting your chains to be very even in size. If you haven't crocheted before, I don't want you to worry about them all being perfect, exactly like what Jenny said. So I see a question, my slip knot is a lot bigger than the chain, how to keep it the same size? So that's a great question. The slip knot, depending on how tightly you pull it, might be pretty big. But remember that you can adjust the slip knot by pulling the yarn tighter. So if you feel like your slip knot is too big, you can keep pulling that yarn, the short yarn, and that will make the slip knot a little bit smaller. Okay, now I know somebody is talking about some video issues, but it seems like everyone else is able to see the video. So that may be something on your end. So we're going to just keep working on these chains until people feel more comfortable. I'm going to show an example using, I don't usually crochet with the pen method, but I'm going to show it as best as I can because I know that some people find that more comfortable. So that will give them a little bit of a better control.
Marie, we do have one question in the queue.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
She's wondering, are there recommended ways of holding the yarn coming from the ball?
Yes. So I usually suggest for beginners not to be too stressed out about that. But I think one of the first things to think about is you don't want to have a tight grip with this hand. And that can happen when you're a beginner. People tend to be very stressed out about doing things perfectly, which is fine. We're all adults here. We've been expert at a lot of things in our life. Sometimes when we learn something new, it actually creates stress because we're not that good at it. So I want you to focus as much as you can on keeping your hands as relaxed as possible. That's going to prevent you from having some type of hand injury. So as far as holding the yarn, like I said, there's a lot of different techniques. Some people wrap it so that it goes through multiple fingers like this. For me, that is harder actually to control. So I usually just wrap it over one finger. And then in the case like this, where I'm working on a table, I can also just use the base of my hand to hold it so that it doesn't stretch too much. If I want to let it go more, I can lift my hand up and I have more slack. Some people hold it like this. Again, being careful not to tighten it so tightly that you tighten your hand in a kind of a dangerous way. So I think you have to be always careful about not hurting yourself, especially when you're learning. So trying a couple of different methods, right? And and seeing what works best for you. These are just a couple of different types of grips that I'm showing right now that you can try, and seeing what's the most comfortable. And then also remembering that it may, for a lot of people, it's hard to focus on both at once. So on both hands, I mean. So as you're starting to crochet, you'll find that it's much easier to worry about the hand with the hook a little bit more. And then once you have those gestures down, you can focus a little bit more on the hand with the yarn. But like I said, a couple of the different ways that people hold it are to wrap the yarn like this or like this, and then also to use the base of your hand to hold the yarn as well. I hope that answered the question. And so hopefully people might have other questions that they want to ask. Jenny can let me know. So as I mentioned, as you're first crocheting, you want to just focus on the motions that you're making. So again, you're wrapping the yarn from the back to the front. You're pulling that loop through the loop that's on your hook by maneuvering your hook. So most of the motions are going to be about pulling your hook towards the one that towards the hand that's controlling it. You can see that I am holding this chain actually with my fingers. The reason for that is I find that that's actually helpful for beginners, because if you're just sort of going like this, the yarn is very easy for it to fall all over the place again. So I recommend you might use one finger or two fingers together just to hold the chain so that it's not rotating all over the place. It makes it a lot easier. So hopefully by now, all of us have at least a few chains on our crochet hook. And so we're going to try a different method, a different stitch now, which is called the single crochet. And that's kind of one of the building blocks of crochet. So what we're going to do, I'm just taking my hook out for a moment here so we can look at our hooks here, our loops here. So this loop that was on our hook, we don't count this as a stitch. Okay, so if we were to go back and say, gosh, how many stitches did I make? We're not counting that loop that was on our hook. We're going to count sort of the loops that are off the hook. And hopefully you can see them. They're sort of these little circles, right? So we're going to skip that first little circle before the loop on our hook. And we're going to put our hook into the next little loop. All right. And so we're going to always be working from front to back. We're not trying to stab ourselves with the crochet hook. We're going away from ourselves. So it's a little bit like knife safety, right? We want to keep it away from ourselves. So we're going to, with this loop that was already on the hook, we're going to insert the hook into that next loop from front to the back. And now we have two loops on our hook. And then we're going to yarn over again, like we've been doing, where it's from the back towards the front. And we're going to pull that new loop just through the first one. So just one time, like that. Okay, so now we have two extra loops on the hook. And then we're going to yarn over again, and we're going to pull it through both loops. Now, if you're struggling with this, it may be because your loops are too tight. How can you make your loops looser? You can pull up on your hook before you start the stitch, and you can pull back down to make them tighter. Okay, so you have control of the tightness, even though it doesn't always feel like that, based on the yarn that's coming from the ball. So now we're going to put our hook into the next loop. How do we know which is the right one? Well, the stitch that we just went into has a whole bunch of stuff there. So it's not going to be that one. We're going to put our hook into the next one. So we're going to insert our hook again. We have the two loops. We're going to yarn over, and then we're going to pull that new loop through the first loop, and then yarn over and pull that new loop through both loops. And that's our single crochet. We're going to keep doing that. So again, it's insert your hook, yarn over and pull through just the first loop, yarn over and pull through both loops. I'm going to check in with Jenny and see if we have any other questions because I can't really see what's happening in the chat right now, but I know we're coming towards the end. So I want to make sure if we have any other critical questions that we can check in on those.
Yeah, we don't really have any too critical.
Okay.
Shelly did just ask, can you start that again, please? I think
Yes, absolutely. We can do that again.
Did.
Okay, so we're going to insert our hook into the next loop, and we'll have 2 loops. Then we're going to wrap the yarn from the back to the front. Then we're pulling that new loop through just the first loop. We have 2 loops now. We're going to wrap the yarn from the back to the front again. And then we're pulling that loop through both loops. Okay. And again, if you're very new to crochet, I don't want you to be worried about, oh, my stitches aren't all the same exact size and one of them looks lumpy and the other one doesn't, because what we're trying to do is build the muscle memory. That's what's going to make all your stitches look beautiful and perfect, right? So if you focus instead on the motions and not on, you know, sort of, oh no, I didn't do it right. That's going to help you build the muscle memory you need to make perfect stitches every time. So I'm going to sort of keep doing these. And again, just to remind people, you're going to be inserting your hook into the next chain. So you'll have 2 loops. You're going to wrap the yarn over. You're going to pull the yarn through 1 loop only. And then you're going to wrap the yarn over and you're going to pull the yarn through 2 loops. Okay. And that's the single crochet. Now, what can you make with single crochet? So many things. It's a really cool stitch that you can use for a lot of things. If you can, most crochet toys are made with single crochet only because it's easier, since it's such a short stitch, to keep the stuffing from falling out. You can use it for, you know, blankets, for garments, for a lot of different things. With single crochet, if you are going to use it for garment, you have to remember it doesn't have a lot of drape. And so in order to make the garment not look like sort of a helmet, you're going to have to use usually a larger crochet hook than you would normally use for that weight of yarn, to make sure that you can sort of keep it going. So I'm just keeping on doing these sort of slowly without saying what I'm doing, but hopefully that helps. And so, and again, if there's other questions, let us know, because we have just a couple of minutes left here.
Lynn was wondering, do you know if this stitch is called double crochet in the UK?
Yes, it is called double crochet in the UK. And thank you for reminding me that. In different countries, the stitches have different names. So in the US, the first stitch that we called is a chain, and that's also called a chain in the UK. The stitch that we're doing now is called a single crochet in the US and a double crochet in the UK. So that is a little confusing. So when you get a pattern, it's helpful to always check where was it published, and that will give you a clue as to which type of terms. But actually nowadays, a lot of UK designers also use American terms. So you might still have to double check just to make sure you're doing the right stitch, because that can be definitely confusing. So that's a great question. So I'm just continuing with my single crochet across what we call a row. So this sort of length of stitches is a row. Something that you may have noticed is that we're always moving from the side of our dominant hand towards the side of our non-dominant hand. So because I'm a righty, I'm always moving from right to left. If you're a lefty, you would be moving this way, right, from left to right. And so oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Do you have any tips to keep it from curling as they go?
Great question. So usually single crochet on the first row or 2 will curl. And that's actually just a normal thing about the stitch. As you make more stitches and more rows, it should start to uncurl a little bit. And so I'm actually going to abandon this side of the chain and just show you how you would make the next row quickly. We would chain 1. So remember that chain that we did at the beginning. And then we would flip the whole piece, because we want to be, again, working from right to left if we're righties, or left to right if we're lefties. And then we would skip that chain, insert our hook into the first single crochet, and it's exactly what we've been doing all the way across. Okay. And so with that, as we make more of these rows, it tends to curl less, to answer that question. If you're getting a lot of curling in general, though, it's probably because your tension is very tight. And so I might suggest using a one size up crochet hook, so that, because at the beginning it's hard to control your tension. So it's better to use the hook to give us a little bit of a larger loop. Any other questions that we have, Jenny?
No, a few people were asking at the beginning of the class if you would be discussing turning at the end of rows, blocking, and crochet in the round. So I know those are three totally different things.
Yes. So
If you
turning at
just
the
have-
end of the row, we just did that briefly.
Mhm.
Blocking, we won't talk about in depth, but something to think about with blocking, it's basically a way of getting your crochet stitches to relax at the end of the project. So there's different tools for doing that, but usually just water and pins is your best tool. You just put some water on the project, cold water, and then pin it to the shape that you want. And that's the best way to block it. And then what was the third one, Jenny?
Crocheting in the round.
Staying in the round. Yeah, in this particular class, we're not going to focus on crocheting in the round, but that is just right now we've been crocheting in rows, and crocheting in the round is just a different technique where you start with a small amount of stitches and you increase steadily as you continue to crochet.
And there are a few questions in the chat. How do you get even sides, Maria?
Even sides. So even sides are basically, you know, again, you crochet more evenly as you develop the motor skills. And so what I would suggest is practicing the stitches. And after you start to feel comfortable to where you're not saying in your own mind, yarn over, pull through one loop, yarn over, pull through two loops. Instead, you're just sort of saying, I'm doing a single crochet, and it's just happening by magic. Once you get to that magic point where you're so comfortable with the stitch, you can focus more on getting them more even. And the way to get them even is really to focus on how big your loop is before you put it into the next stitch. Because if this loop is like huge and then it's like this, that is going to make the stitches all different sizes.
Okay, we are running out of time, but a few people are just kind of asking what's next. Go back up the single chain we just did.
Great question. So if you want to
Yeah.
continue on this project, making just a swatch that you can use, or you can turn it into, you know, a coaster or whatever you want with it. Again, you would, at the end of each row, you would make the chain, and then you just go back again into the next row. When single crochet is really small, it's a little bit hard to know the top from the bottom. Your starting chain should be facing down, so that that extra yarn should be at the bottom. So if you see that it's up here, you're crocheting into the wrong part. So you want to make sure that that chain you started with at the beginning and that short piece of yarn is towards the bottom of your project for every row.
Okay, I'm not totally sure what Janet means. She says, I need to see the flip. And then Anna was saying, are you inserting the hook on one loop of the bottom row or on two loops?
That's a great question. You can do it either way. It's personal preference, and they have different looks actually. So if you crochet by putting your hook under both of these loops, you will get a little bit of a stiffer piece. If you just insert it under the loop in the front, you'll get a little bit of a better drape. And if you crochet by inserting it just under the loop in the back, you will get more of a ribbed look. So I suggest actually doing one row in each way as a way to, and then check out by doing another row in the other way, and then you can compare the different looks.
Okay, Susan says, thank you. I think I'm finally getting the hang of it, which is
okay.
So very informative, great intro to crochet. So I know there were a few other questions of people that see, you know, a repeat of you doing certain things. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today, but good news, we recorded this whole class, so you guys can go back and rewatch whatever you want to see on this video from today. So I apologize that we were not able to get back to some of the turning of the, you know, at the end of the rows again. But like I said, we are recording. You guys will get a link to the recording in 24 hours from today. So we'll upload it to YouTube and send you the link.
Yep, and you can just go back to each part and watch that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, perfect. This is my email address. If you guys have any questions that we didn't quite get to today, feel free to email me directly, jbowden@primecp.com. And then here is how you can find Marie on all of her wonderful social media accounts. She has a great YouTube channel as well, with tons of videos. If you want to find more videos from Marie, check her out there, plus her Facebook and Instagram. Again, one more time, this great deal from our friends at I Like Crochet, 75% off the regular price of $47.64. So you just pay $11.88 for a whole year subscription. It's a really great deal. Favecrafts.com is also our main kind of general crafting site. So everything on Favecrafts is totally free. If you aren't quite ready to invest in premium content quite yet, we have tons and tons of great free crochet patterns on Favecrafts. We also have allfreecrochet.com, which is a website just for crochet stuff. So tons of additional inspiration there as well. So that is all we have for today. Thank you so, so much, Marie, for joining us and leading the show and teaching us about crochet today. And
sure. And I hope to see some of you for Tunisian crochet and
yes,
the Borders class and the Pineapple Stitch class.
Yes, lots of fun stuff coming up in the next couple of weeks. Again, that link to sign up to those advanced classes, I will include it in the email tomorrow with the link to today's video, but it is favecrafts.eventbrite.com. So, all right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.